And today I'm joined by a very special guest, Mr. Riggs Eckelberry. Riggs, thanks for giving us your time today. Really appreciate you being here.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Great. Would you mind giving our listeners the 411 on who you are and what you're going to bring to the show today?
So, Nick, I basically had a very eclectic career leading up to finally being in the water industry. I especially had an amazing time during the .com building out what we're the World Wide Web we have today, especially after 2000, really starting to do interesting work. And eventually I felt I could, qualify as a CEO. What's weird is that the fund that decided I could be a CEO promptly put me into a totally different space, having nothing to do with high tech, called algae. And that was a wild and crazy ride that eventually led to this, what I'm doing now.
So take us back to like the very beginning. Sounds like you've been an entrepreneur for a long time. Like, take us through some of the different projects you've worked on in your lifetime.
Thank you. Well, I grew up in the Caribbean and in Europe, and son of basically a Procter & Gamble exec who was relocating everywhere. So I have like two friends from school. But that also gave me, kind of like a very short attention span. And I, coming out of school, I worked in a nonprofit, eventually became a ship captain and sailed the South Pacific on, tramp merchant ships and all that good stuff. And eventually, though, I realized that I really like to be around people and interact and try and make change happen with, civilization. And that's where I landed in the early 80s with the idea of helping to drive this big technology change that was happening, where companies that were on paper systems were starting to move over to these early mini computers. And I had an amazing learning experience that was frankly really, 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 really tough. Learned the value of capital back then. And then in the 1990s, really jumped on board the whole web.com thing. And more and more, I felt that technology was more than just about computing things, but also really about communication. And that's come true today. I mean, frankly, the Pandora has left the box. We have so much communication now that it's hard to keep track of it. And in net, I think it's a good thing.
I'm curious what you got involved in around the .com area. What was interesting, and what did you work on that kind of caught your fancy?
Well, early on, I was recruited into a company called Quarterdeck, which was built utilities for desktop. So I was in classic conventional, memory managers and that kind of utilities stuff. But Quarterdeck was the second licensee of the early Mosaic browser. And I remember sitting there and trying this thing and going click, and you go from London to Atlanta and it's the same screen. And I was like, oh my God, we're erasing space, right? We're able to go anywhere and anyhow and not have any issue with how to get there. And that was for me an epiphany. And I quickly got involved as the head of strategic marketing at that company. And I think, unfortunately, they were very distracted, very unfocused. They rolled out 28 internet products, including what became WebEx, and succeeded at none of them. But it built my network. And from that, I was able to get involved in a series of companies that were sold very quickly. And that's one of the lessons I learned about when you sort of, when you get acquired, there's a lot of destruction that occurs because the acquirer typically is not very interested in your creative work. Nonetheless, at each stage, I think I became more and more savvy about what I was good at, and really what I'm good at. I call it mistake-based marketing. I'm very good at trying something out, learning quickly from it, and then in a way recovering, learning my lessons, and then forging ahead. Right now, of course, lately that's turned into the model called Scared Rabbit, but that's a whole other thing.
So once you kind of, I like what you're saying as far as trying to figure out yourself. So did you really, was that a point in your career where you got really self-aware of who you are and what made you tick and what you're good at and what maybe you weren't good at?
Yeah, it's true. It's a very good point you bring up, because I had this fantasy early on that I wanted to be in film. And in fact, I went ahead in the early 90s, between after my New York nightmare, I kind of was licking my wounds, and I ended up in the film industry for a couple of years. And I was drawn back to tech, and I realized that I really am a technology guy. I really am about the transformative effect of technology. And that I finally went, you know what, dude, you're not going to be Martin Scorsese, but maybe you can be an emulator of Steve Jobs, and that is just fine. And it's turned out to be what I love.
So take us to the point where you got into the water industry. Like what was right before that? What kind of prompted that? And take us through that journey, if you don't mind.
It's interesting because, as I mentioned, we launched a company. Okay, so fast forwarding to 2005, 2006, I helped take a company public in the software space, and I was the number two. I was the COO, and like all COOs, I believed I could do a better job than the CEO. They all do, right? The CEO is an idiot. I could do better. So I was crazy enough to say that to a fund, and they said, "Well, actually, we got a job for you as a CEO of a public company. We make our companies public early on and raise the money in the public space. But we don't do tech anymore. We do green. And this new thing is called algae. We want you to launch an algae company." And I went, okay. Fortunately, I have a brother, a very brilliant engineering brother called Riggs Eckelberry, who had a patent that could be used to feed the little algae beasts. And we launched a company from that patent. Everything was going great. In fact, I remember debating Jim Rogers on Bloomberg and all these. I had huge media attention because it was all like, algae, whoa, what's that about? For fuels, right? To replace fossil fuels. We were called Origin Oil back then because algae was the original oil. And so I'm getting all, these, on Fox Business, I was called Algae Man, and it was great. Unfortunately, fracking came along. Price of fuel crashed. By 2014, it was down in the 30s from $120 a barrel, and algae became a science experiment. I don't believe in shutting down. I believe in making it go right. That's one big lesson I got from my experience in the 80s in New York. And so we found a way to reinvent our technology to clean water. And all of a sudden we were in the water industry. And that was totally different. The water industry was nothing like what you might call the green space. It's very old school. It's about public health. It's, traditional. It doesn't change much, but a tremendous amount of health issues are associated with water in the world. So it's, on the one hand, a big, big problem. On the other hand, a very complacent, relatively slow moving industry. And so right in the middle of it, I was like, okay, well, let's see if we can change things. And that's where I put my efforts to disrupt things to work. And it's been this huge challenge. And frankly, the COVID year had a lot to do with how we finally clicked, but we're starting to make the disruption happen.
So I like how the stories go, and that you're one of those entrepreneurs that have different things happen. So you really don't give up. You just adapt. Were there times where you're ready to just give up?
There have been times when, I think every entrepreneur, when you're down to credit cards.
Yeah, right.
Like, oh Lord. Well, I learned because in the 80s, I'd had that experience. You launch a company, 12 employees in Manhattan, and you're trying to make payroll every 2 weeks. And it was crazy. And the problem is I didn't realize the business I was in, which was computerizing companies, had an annuity to it, that any customer you got would be probably good for 10, 20 years with these monthly, per seat fees that they charge. I didn't fully realize that. And I gave away the business. The guy I gave the business away to he's grateful to this day for all the clients I gave him that he has even today. So I learned really that failure is unnecessary. You just need to push through and create somehow you got to find the hole to break through, a football analogy, I guess. And in our case, we're not going to let it go. Now, the big problem occurred early February 2020, right around my birthday, when we saw everything fall apart, where oil prices crashed because of Wuhan being closed for a month. And we realized we had a real problem. We had a real problem. And we didn't know back then there was going to be PPP or anything like that. We just went, oh, Christ, this thing is going south. And what do we do? So we had some unsolved issues with the way that the company was designed. It wasn't growing the way it should. And we realized, it's do that or die. And that was the moment we spent the next, few months fixing things. At the same time, I don't know if you remember, the Airbnb CEO says they did 10 years worth of work in 10 weeks. That's the kind of stuff that was going on back then. People were figuring out, what do we do in this new environment? And the companies that figured it out got through the other side, and they're winning today, right? And many companies closed, sadly. We weren't going to do that. So that was when, night and day, we were just, what is the model? What do we do? And we found the bug, and we built this new model which we think is killer.
So really, it was through COVID that you were able to design a new model. Is that what you're saying?
COVID forced us. I like to say that with COVID, everything chronic became acute. If you had a Neiman Marcus and your model was broken, you were going to die eventually. Well, you were going to die now. And that's really, if the model was broken, COVID was the acid test, in my opinion, because it forced everybody to have a reckoning. At the end of the day, any sort of Darwinian event is good long term. A lot of people have had to reinvent themselves, and we did that. It was really interesting.
Well, tell us about the reinventing the company. I guess to give everyone a little bit of background, you said it's a public company. How many employees are employed through the company?
We have about 30 employees. Most of them are in Texas, bending metal, actually building systems. The company is based in Florida, but it's mostly virtual. A small executive level team, 3 or 4 people. Most of the people are, as I say, making water systems on a daily basis, and crazy busy and dealing with those supply chain problems, right? But OCLN is the ticker symbol, or OriginClear. We're a penny stock company and 14 years doing it. And I have to say that, I think you were going to ask me a little bit about what the heck did we come up with in 2020?
Yeah, I definitely was. I like where you're going though too. I find it interesting when you talk about being a public company and kind of what that means, and being traded as a penny stock company too. Can you talk a little bit about that real quick before we get into 2020 and the change that happened?
Yeah, well, it's a different world. If you're, a lot of companies, they go private. They do, seed round, A round, B round, mezzanine round, et cetera. Well, what we did was we did a pre-IPO round, and then boom, we were public. And from that point on, we were raising money from private placements, and learned eventually not to get our money from the toxic lenders on Wall Street and all that. Talk about lessons learned. And what we really learned was that if you take care of them, your accredited investors, the people who invest the $100,000, they are your best people. They'll hold on, they'll support you, they believe in you. And that's when we finally figured out. So 14 years, we learned how to keep the company going. We like to say that today we are basically Tesla 2004, meaning we know what we're doing. Back then Elon Musk knew he was making an electric car, but he was cash negative, but he was building cars. And that's kind of where we are today. Is we kind of know our model, we know what we're doing, we're building it, and we're very fortunate to have the support of accredited investors to keep us going. And the beauty of a small public company is, if you do it with any kind of skill at all, is you have a currency. You have something that is worth money, which is your stock, right? And so that is an opportunity to essentially be an investment vehicle for people that's much more liquid than what they're accustomed to, for example, in the VC space.
So take us through the change now of what happened in 2020 and kind of where you're going from there.
Right. Well, so Nick, what we had was 2019, we were like, okay, because we had in 2018 acquired a technology that for these modular packaged water systems, which we believe were the future. Again, because there's a long-term trend in water of decentralization, less and less happening at the city level and more happening at the business level. So these small systems we felt were the future, and we got into it and we invested money, and we get 2019. Okay, we're going to go from $4 million to $20 million, and we get to the end of 2019, and we still made only $4 million, which is what we've been making for 4 years since, right? And that's where and so we're kind of licking our wounds in the first quarter of 2020, and then the COVID disruption hits, and we're like, okay, you know what? We'd better do this right. And that's because all investors went into fear. They went from greed to fear, and they went, oh my God, what's going on? And we had to make sense, and we had to recognize that our slow growth model was a slow growth model. And what it was simply trying to build systems is fine, but it takes forever. And we had $40+ million worth of quoted systems sitting there of people. Yeah, I'm going to go with you. I'm going to buy a system. And they would take years to come around. And so we had this big asset that had drained all the staff time to build, but it wasn't being monetized. And that's when we went, wait a minute. Eventually we had this realization, it must have been about 11 at night, somewhere in March, when we realized it's the money, stupid. What if we made it so that all they had to do was sign a piece of paper, and we charge by the gallon? So like Microsoft charges us for Microsoft Office, but in this case, literally every gallon has a bill attached to it. What if we did water as a service? And it was an epiphany. It was like, my gosh. And our ability to raise money as a penny stock turned into a real asset because we know how to do it. And so now we began to work on what we now call water on demand, which is basically a water as a managed service. And that is what we've started to roll out finally. And what's weird is that our base business, the one that was so just constipated, has actually blown up as well. It's totally ironic. And we're sitting in a great place with that. So the basic business has finally taken off, but we still don't feel it's enough. Now, water on demand is great because it's a pure money play. If I've got the capital, because it requires capital to build the systems, to put them out on a service contract. Well, if I've got that ability, then I don't have to just rely on my center in Texas. I can give the job to an Atlanta water company or anybody else, because I'm the entity that's actually doing the capital side and billing and returning monthly annuities and so forth. So I think it's an exceptionally strong model. And we're easing into it by raising the capital for it and learning how to do that managed services, which is very high tech, right? And of course, I'm in my element there. So this is what's really different about the company today. Now, the water industry knows water as a service. It's an obvious thing, but they've always done it for very large installations, like desalination for an entire island. Nobody's been doing it for local businesses. So $250,000, $500,000, $1 million systems, Nobody has done them as a service. There's one small private company that does a good job of that. But aside from that, it's been kind of a wasteland, primarily because the big water companies is too small for them, right? And there we get into the problem of legacy companies like American Water Works, Veolia, et cetera, that are wedded to these big, high ticket municipal deals. And they're kind of being caught unawares, I think, with the migration towards these small, local, cut the cord type operations that are being built today. Anyway, that's what's super exciting. And then, of course, there was that icing on the cake with the coin, which is a whole other story.
So can you break it down like more into layman's terms, I guess, as far as like what I'm trying to catch what it is that you do with the clean water, if you could break it down a little bit more for me.
Well, it's dirty water, right? So this is wastewater treatment.
Okay, so this is wastewater treatment is what we're talking about.
Correct. Remember that 80% of all sewage created in the world is not treated. It's dumped untreated. Now, that's not true in the US. We treat most of our water, but in places like Bangladesh, it's just dumped. Mexico, we are creating a horrendous mess with our groundwater. I mean, look at California. California says it's so great, and yet they have polluted every one of their aquifers by permitting the Kern County oil industry to dump produced water untreated for a century, right? So there's horror stories in water, dirty water, and it have to be fixed. Now, very few countries have their act together with water, dirty water. One of them is Israel, amazing success story. They recycle almost 90% of their water. They do a great job with desalination. They're very organized, but you can do that because they're small and they're centrally managed and they can get away with it. In our sort of chaotic, semi-capitalist kind of environment, there's a lot of neglect and there's a lot of short-term thinking and a lot of leakage. Up to 30% of all clean water transmitted through the municipal systems is wasted and is what's called non-revenue water. Then it gets used. 84% of all water is actually used by agriculture and industry. It's made dirty. Now what do you do with it? Well, we just dump it. And so we got to fix the clean. We got to clean the water. So let's say you're a brewery and you're pushing out a lot of beer water, beer effluent, and local city won't take your water anymore. This is very common these days. What do? You better start treating it yourself. You can't just dump it in the local river. And so that is creating an opportunity. There's housing subdivisions that are, because more and more rural development's happening, they are disconnected from sewage. We just fixed a trailer park problem in Alabama where they just the city would just not let them connect to the sewage. Just not going to happen. Well, what are you going to do? You got the poop coming out. And so that is what's happening throughout America and I believe the world, but we're really focusing on North America right now, is to make it possible for people who have a business to treat the water. And that's where the financing comes in, because if I'm a brewer, I'm capitalized to make beer and I make money from beer. I'm not capitalized to spend $500,000 on a water system. But if you tell me, Riggs, I would like to treat my water, and I hand you a 15-year service contract, you'll sign it. Problem goes away. You'll pay more for that water system. It's very profitable for the water company, but you'll be happy. The problem is taken care of, and you're only paying for the water if it's properly treated. So it's a win-win all around. And that is the future of water treatment in this country, and I hope the world.
So then you would come in and your company would build the water system in exchange for a 50-year contract?
50. These systems can last 50 or 100 years, but realistically, contracts, these water, it's like these solar power purchase agreements, they are water purchase agreements. And these things are typically in the 15-year range. You're not going to ask a business to sign a longer contract than that.
Okay, now if somebody could purchase a water system, if they were just overcapitalized and they're like, yeah, we're just going to purchase our own $500,000 water system, they could do that. But if you
That's
come
our
in,
business. That's been our legacy business. We have lots of it to this day. People are buying
okay,
systems, and it goes fine. And and in many cases they can do it. But increasingly, you see what's happening is water is going from a career that I'm in the water industry and I treat water to I've got a business and I got this water problem. Well, that means I just need a black box that's serviced, that just takes care of the problem. I'm not making water my business. And
yep.
so that is really a sea change in water where people just need the problem to go away. And it's been identified by a number of think tanks in the water industry that this is the new trend. But the funny thing is very few people like you even know that this is going on. Many people assume like, well, you know what, the city's taking care of stuff, but increasingly it's not. The share of federal contribution to infrastructure has gone from 67% to now less than, or it's down to 4% now. And I don't think I'm going to see an infrastructure bill anytime soon coming out of Washington. So the whole thing's falling apart. Solution, take the load off. Let people treat water where they make it dirty. And that way your infrastructure can be much lighter and you can survive without the $1 trillion catch-up budget.
So how much money would you make off a contract for 15 years compared to just letting them buy it outright?
Well, we built the pro forma, but just in a big picture kind of thing.
Big picture, right?
Yeah. A $20 million water equipment fund, such as we're building right now, generates over 25 years, $500 million in revenues and pushes about $135 million to the bottom line for us. That is better than selling $20 million worth of equipment. So the annuity is what's important, and Wall Street loves these long life cycles, right? So it's very good. We have an ambition to get on the NASDAQ. Here's what's great. When we put these machines out to work, they remain ours. They remain our asset. And NASDAQ wants to see assets. Well, you end up with that $20 million equipment fund that's generating the revenue. This $20 million worth of assets that you still own. And the beauty of it is ours are modular. They roll in, roll out. If the client stops paying, we just take it back. So it's more of a rent-to-center model, which is great because you don't have to get them to give up their firstborn in return for the contract. It's pretty relaxed because you can take it back. So it's really the future. It's what we do with everything. It's what we do with renting offices. It's what we do with software. It's really the way things should be done. And it's what you expect to do with a municipality. You expect to just pay on the meter. Problem is, the municipality increasingly is not doing its job, and now it's dropping down to where you're doing it yourself. We're creating, in a way, micro utilities.
Now, are you seeing similarities between the internet boom and what's going on with cryptocurrency now?
That is really interesting. Okay, so here's what I believe is happening. We know that the finance system is pretty wrecked and getting worse. The US dollar, I think, is going to continue to be in trouble. But because we've got a parallel universe of cryptocurrency that's being built out, I think we will avoid the worst of the hyperinflation. We will not end up, in my opinion, with a Weimar-style hyperinflation. Why? Because increasingly people, businesses, and investors will take refuge in crypto and just come out. I'm going to pull out, a couple pieces of, fractions of Bitcoin and, pay the rent this month with my inflating dollar. And so this was happening in Venezuela right now. They're surviving with crypto, right? So more and more, it's going to be I think a life jacket. I think that countries are trying desperately to put the genie back in the bottle. I think it's a bit late for that, but they'd like to have their own digital currencies and all that, whatever. The point is that without a currency being an honest currency, and isn't it ironic that Bitcoin is an honest currency? But it is, because it's limited. It's got all these safeguards that it's actually, got more long-term value. So what I think is that you're right. It is like the internet was to the legacy world of, telephone systems and so forth. It takes money, it abstracts money out into something that is virtual. I tried doing a coin back in 2018. It didn't work. Why? Because at the time we couldn't figure out how to attach value to a gallon of water. Well, now that we have water as a managed service, every gallon is monetized. And now we can start trading that, and eventually you get a market. Now, it's going to take time. It's not something that happens overnight, and it's certainly not core to our business model today. But I believe strongly that water deserves to have a marketplace. Because think about it. There is no global water marketplace because water is local. You're not going to carry your water from Atlanta to New York. It's too expensive. But that also means, because there's a lack of a marketplace, if you're stuck with really high water rates in Sonoma County, you can't hedge your bets with Singapore water. There's no way to buy options and whatever, right? So in the future, I believe that a water marketplace can occur, but it's going to be a digital marketplace, and it's going to be, I believe, on the crypto layer. So that is where things are going, and I think it's going to be very healthy for water consumers all over the world.
So you're not necessarily using the technology of blockchain. You're more interested in creating a marketplace for water coin. Is that for water in general? Is that fair to say? Or
that's fair to say. We got two sides to it. I'm not going to get in the weeds on what we're creating, but basically it's a dual token environment. One is a simple wrapper for those monetized gallons. That's called $H2O, and that's a pure investment product. And on the other side, we have something called Clear Aqua, which is a community coin that anybody can own, and they can make small amounts of money by alerting, hey, guess what? There's a problem in Fort Lauderdale with the sewage, whatever, and they send the alert up, and then the alert turns into a proposal at a higher level and eventually becomes funded. So our idea is, so many people want to help with water, and they have a limited set of options. And this is a way to get everybody involved. It's kind of kumbaya, but at the end of the day, participation is key. People need to feel that they can have a say in what happens to the quality of water in the world. More people die from water than war, and there's all kinds of bad stats. Well, now you can do something about it. So it's a good futurist kind of thing. I run it entirely out of my office. I don't want to distract anybody in my company with it, because it's real, but it doesn't have applicability yet to our business. So we're making the investment, but really where we're at is this managed services for water today.
Was there a point with crypto that you realized that this was something that's going to have a long-term stay, kind of based off of your past experiences?
Yeah, it's interesting because fall 2017, I had written off, like most foolish people, I had not purchased Bitcoin when it was $200. And I was like, yeah, whatever. But I had this epiphany when a friend of mine, Alex Lightman, who's a big influencer, he turned me on to Bitcoin. So it's these alternate coins in fall of 2017. And I put some money in one of them, and the money quadrupled. I'm like, what's this all about? It just kind of went nuts, right? And I realized that there's something going on here. And the more I got into it, the more I realized it had potential. And by the way, that money that I made, I lost because, of course, there was a lot of trash out there. Same as .com. We had the same problem with, leading up to year 2000 when there was a lot of trash. But I think we've moved beyond that. We're in sort of the post bullshit. Well, there's lots of bullshit. There's a lot of those meme coins and whatever. but there's also good stuff happening and being built, and there's a lot of good people in the industry that I've become friends with. They're, I think, trying to maybe do good things with crypto. So my realization in 2017 propelled me to do a coin way too early in 2018 called Water Chain. And but it was, that was our MySpace. That was our learning experience. And now hopefully we're doing the next generation.
Well, you mentioned two words together that made one word, and I'm kind of interested if it's your concept or what you kind of were talking about. So explain scared rabbit to us.
It really means that you got to be very sensitive to small indicators. Some things like maybe your forecast is kind of like getting a little thin there. Like, wait a minute, there's not as much business coming in, or you got to be very sensitive to your key performance indicators, and like, wait a minute, there's something going on, and quickly, don't even delay, fix it on the spot, just crowd the problem until it becomes a solution. So by scared rabbit, I mean, rabbits are like, what's going on? What's going on? What's going on? And sometimes they overreact. Sometimes they're maybe too much in fear. Everything scares them, but that's healthy. To be aware of, like, okay, supply chain problem, because our guys in Texas are dealing with that right now. We know there's all this stuff about, I don't know, if container ships stranded off Long Beach Harbor, who knows? But so we're aware of that kind of stuff, and we plan for it, and we learned quickly that we better have do or die dates on our contracts, because we would start losing money because of inflation. Well, all these things you got to do quickly, because things move so fast these days that if you don't do it quickly, you will go upside down very quickly. So I used to say, my motto used to be overkill works, as in do it more, but that doesn't have the time element in it. I think scared rabbit says, fix it now. And you may even do it wrong a little bit, but that gave you data too. And if you're moving fast enough, people won't even notice you made a mistake, right? It's like the guy's trying to pick up a girl and he gives the wrong line, but he quickly saves it by saying the right thing, right? So girl doesn't even notice, hopefully. That's kind of what I'm talking about.
Riggs, I really appreciate the conversation today. If people want to get more of you or learn more about the projects you're working on, what's the best place to reach out to you?
Well, Nick, every week I do a Zoom briefing where we're the most transparent public company in America, I think, and we just tell it all every Thursday night, 5 p.m. Pacific, 8 p.m. Eastern, and people can go to the OriginClear.com, and there's a sign up there for the CEO briefing. Join me, and you'll be able to chat there and get on the list. And when I send out a newsletter and you reply, it goes into my inbox, and I'm going to answer you. So I look forward to hearing from your listeners.
Wonderful. Now it's the time we get to solve the equation to Riggs' success. This is where I get to ask you 7 rapid fire questions. Are you ready?
Yes, sir.
Okay. Best seminar or teaching that you've ever been to?
I love Manuel Suarez. It's called the Facebook Ninja, and agmagency.com. These guys are amazing. They are pioneers in Facebook, and they do amazing. The learnings from the Facebook Ninja are amazing.
Favorite item you bought recently under $100?
Actually, one of those grow trays where you learn how to grow stuff yourself at home, because we're going to have to become green thumbs with this new world, right?
Name an idol or hero of yours that you've met in person.
One of my heroes of my early career was a man who's very well known but also misunderstood, is L. Ron Hubbard, and I apprenticed with him for 3 years. I learned a lot about many things, and every single day, I stuff that he showed me or taught me back in 1981, way back in the day, still with me, right? So actually, it was a lot earlier than that he did it. I was not even 20 when I learned these lessons from him, but they're with me to this day.
Favorite book to give as a gift?
Depends who you are. If you are a business person, The Innovator's Dilemma by Clayton Christensen is an amazing book. It talks about these legacy businesses that have the seed of their own demise built into them. If you're a person who's not so much into business, then I strongly recommend the legendary Lyman series by Dorothy Dunnett. It is the 14th century brought to life, really interesting series of books. Strongly recommend.
Something you do every morning?
Well, I study. I study to this day. I believe that you've got to keep improving yourself, and so I study various things, but mostly I try to become more self-aware, and that's primarily what I focus on.
Your personal mantra or favorite quote?
Well, my favorite quote I carried for years in my wallet as a teenager, and I still live by it. And it's the man who wrote The Little Prince, Saint-Exupéry. And he wrote, Il n'est qu'un luxe véritable, et c'est celui des relations humaines. There's but one true wealth, and that is human relations. And I strongly believe that.
And place you go to decompress and reset?
I have a rowing machine that is interactive. I'm on it every single day. It's called Hydro. I love it. And I get to interact with my coach on that machine, and I space out. It's wonderful.
Riggs, thanks so much for being on the show today. We really appreciate it. Wish you nothing but success in the future. Thank you so much for your time.
Guys, it's a great pleasure. Nick, thank you so much.